1 in 4. That is the number far Chad Ripperger, one of the most experienced exorcists currently working in the United States, has stated publicly, based on his clinical case experience. 1 in 4 adults are diabolically obsessed, not tempted, not oppressed. Obsessed, which in precise Catholic theological language means that demons are actively and directly bombarding the interior life of that person, their thoughts, their imagination, their mental environment. 1 in 4. Sit with that for a moment. Not 1 in 1,000, not 1 in 100. 1 in 4 adults, sitting in your pew on Sunday morning, standing next to you at the grocery store, possibly the person looking back at you from your bathroom mirror this morning, are experiencing a sustained, organized assault on their interior life, and almost none of them know it. Because every symptom of diabolical obsession, the intrusive thoughts, the violent images that arrive unbidden, the despair, the blasphemies that surface during prayer, is classified in modern psychiatry under a different name entirely. Anxiety disorder, OCD, intrusive thought syndrome, treatment-resistant depression. The symptoms are identical. The cause is different. The treatment is completely different. And what that means is that millions of people are getting the wrong treatment for the right symptoms. My name is Raymond. I spent 35 years teaching Catholic theology at a high school in Covington, Kentucky. I left seminary in my 20s, chose teaching over the priesthood, and spent decades doing what I thought was a complete job. The sacraments, the doctrines, the approved curriculum. I thought I understood Catholic psychology. Then I started reading Padre Pio's actual letters. And in those letters, I found something that none of my textbooks had prepared me for. A first-person account from a canonized saint of what diabolical obsession feels like from the inside. And that account maps, with disturbing precision, onto what millions of Catholics are experiencing right now and calling anxiety. Stay with me. What I am going to share tonight is specific, documented, and practical, and it may be the most useful thing this channel has ever put in front of you. Before anything else, I need to explain what obsession actually means, because the Catholic definition and the psychiatric definition use the same word for two different things, and that confusion is, I believe, one of the primary reasons this condition goes unrecognized for years. In contemporary psychiatry, obsession refers to a thought pattern, intrusive, unwanted, repetitive cognitions that the patient cannot stop through willpower. The standard model assumes these thoughts originate within the patient's own psychology. The treatment targets the patient's neurological and psychological architecture: medication, cognitive behavioral therapy, exposure, and response prevention. In Catholic theology, obsession means something more specific. It does not mean the thoughts originate inside you. It means a demonic entity is projecting thoughts, images, and impulses into your mind from outside. The experience, from the person enduring it, is identical in both cases. You experience thoughts that arrive suddenly, with unusual violence. You experience images that you did not choose and do not want. You experience despair, blasphemy, or violence directed at things you hold sacred. You hate these thoughts, you do not want them, you fight them, and you cannot stop them by willpower alone. Whether the origin is neurological or diabolical, the subjective experience is the same, but the mechanism is entirely different. And the treatment that works for one does not work for the other. Antidepressants cannot revoke a spiritual legal right. Cognitive behavioral therapy cannot drive out a demon. This is not a criticism of psychiatry. It is a description of a category problem. And Padre Pio, who experienced this himself, who documented it in his own hand, and who spent 50 years discerning it in others from the other side of the confessional grill, understood this distinction with a precision that most people today, including most Catholics, have never been taught. I want to go to the primary sources now, because what Padre Pio documented about his own interior experience is not a hagiographic legend, it is a clinical record. Volume 1 of the Epistolario, the 4-volume collection of Padre Pio's personal correspondence, preserved in canonical archives, contains letters written to his spiritual directors, Padre Agostino Daniele and Padre Benedetto Nardella, between 1910 and 1912. These letters are remarkable for a specific reason. Padre Pio was not writing for publication. He was writing because his spiritual directors had commanded him to document his interior experience with complete honesty. And what he documented was this: dark thoughts, his exact phrase in the Italian, arrived in his mind without his consent. Blasphemies, violent images, thoughts of despair about his own salvation. These were not thoughts he chose. They were not the ordinary temptations that accompany spiritual life. They arrived with a quality that he described as external to himself, as if they were being projected into his mind from a source outside him. He wrote in one letter that his mind felt like a battlefield. Not metaphorically, he described the thoughts as bombarding him, his word, his image. A bombardment, something sustained, organized, aimed specifically at the interior landscape where his prayer life existed. And the critical observation he makes, the one that his spiritual director, Padre Benedetto, confirmed was the diagnostic marker, is this: his will remained oriented toward God throughout the entire assault. That is the theological distinction that separates obsession from every other category of diabolical influence. In obsession, the will is not compromised. The enemy cannot reach the will directly. Aquinas is clear about this. No created being, no demon, can compel the rational will. That door opens only from the inside. What the enemy can do is flood the imagination and the lower faculties, the part of the human psyche that processes images, fears, and sensory impressions, with content the person did not choose and does not want. Padre Pio's will said yes to God throughout all of it, but his interior life was a battlefield. He wanted the bombardment to stop. He prayed against it. He used every act of will available to him, and it did not stop through willpower alone. That is the specific marker. That is what his spiritual director confirmed was not psychological illness, but genuine diabolical obsession. Dr. Gabriele Amorth, the Vatican's chief exorcist for decades, confirmed this in An Exorcist Tells His Story. He writes that Padre Pio suffered the attacks of formidable enemies, the demons who besieged him. Amorth is explicit. This was not metaphor, not spiritual language describing ordinary temptation. It was the sustained external assault of diabolical obsession experienced by a man whose will never surrendered. What this means for you is something I want to state plainly. If the most documented mystic of the 20th century, whose interior life was examined by multiple qualified spiritual directors over decades, experienced diabolical obsession and initially could not distinguish it from psychological distress, then it is not unreasonable to conclude that millions of ordinary Catholics are failing to recognize the same thing in themselves. That is the problem nobody names. That is what Padre Ripperger's 25% represents. And the first step toward doing something about it is learning to recognize it. Ripperger's taxonomy of diabolical influence identifies 6 distinct levels of ascending severity. The first is temptation, universal. Every human being experiences this. It is not a sign of special demonic attention. It is the ordinary condition of fallen nature. The second is obsession. This is the first level involving sustained internal assault. The demon projects into the mind thoughts, images, voices, compulsions, without gaining any foothold in the will itself. This is stage 2, and this is what Ripperger estimates affects 1 in 4 adults. The third is oppression, external disruption, financial ruin, shattered relationships, chronic physical illness that resists medical explanation. The fourth is vexation, physical attack. This is what Padre Pio and St. John Vianney documented: physical blows, injuries with no natural cause. The fifth is subjugation. The will begins to yield in specific areas. The person is not fully controlled, but the enemy holds a grip on particular dimensions of thought and choice. The sixth is possession. Rare, heavily documented in exorcism literature, full demonic governance of the faculties. Ripperger's clinical observation from examining approximately 150 cases per year is that of all those cases, only 3 in 150 involve full possession. The vast majority, the overwhelming weight of the caseload, is obsession and oppression, most of which has been entirely medicalized, most of which is sitting in therapists' offices every week on medication, making some progress but not reaching the root. And the root is spiritual, not because the psychiatrist is wrong about the symptoms, because the psychiatrist does not have the tools to address the cause. Think about what that number means practically. 1 in 4 adults. In America, that is approximately 65 million people, walking through their daily lives, going to work, some of them going to mass, with the interior equivalent of someone standing inside their mind shouting at them, and no category for what is actually happening. No wonder the anxiety statistics have exploded since the 1980s. No wonder treatment-resistant cases fill the caseloads. No wonder people who are genuinely devout, who pray, who do the right things, still feel like there is something wrong inside their interior life that nothing is reaching. Something is wrong. The name for it has existed in the Catholic tradition for 2,000 years. Most people have simply never been taught it. Now I need to explain how this happens, because a legitimate question stands in the middle of everything I have said so far. If a Catholic goes to Mass, receives the sacraments, lives a reasonably devout life, how does this reach them? The mechanism is what Ripperger calls legal rights. This is the concept I want you to understand clearly, because without it, nothing else I'm going to say tonight makes full sense. A legal right, in Ripperger's framework, which is rooted directly into mystic theology and confirmed by the consistent teaching of exorcism practitioners across centuries, is a specific form of authorization, not permission that God grants to the enemy. Permission that the affected person grants through their own choices. The enemy operates within a juridical structure. He cannot simply go where he pleases. He must establish standing, a claim, a legal foothold created by the actions or omissions of the person he is targeting. And there are 4 primary ways that legal right gets established. The first is habitual mortal sin that has not been genuinely confessed. Not just confessed in form, genuinely confessed, with actual contrition, with the intention to amend with honest disclosure of what was done. A sin confessed without genuine sorrow is not absolved. The sacrament's mechanics require interior cooperation, and a habitual sin, one the person confesses while secretly reserving the right to continue, creates a pattern of unresolved legal debt. That pattern is a legal right. The second is occult contact, even casual contact. This is the one that surprises people most. Ripperger is specific about this in his teaching. It is not only dramatic occult involvement, Ouija boards, satanic rituals, formal occult practice that creates legal rights. Casual horoscope reading, tarot cards used recreationally, apps and meditation practices built around emptying the mind, creating a passive interior state in which no act of will is governing what enters. Contact with spiritual forces that are not God, even without conscious intention to contact them, creates legal authorization. The third is generational legal rights, spirits operating within a family bloodline through the sins of ancestors. This is documented extensively in both the exorcism literature and the Old Testament. The sins of the fathers, Freemasonry in a grandfather, serious apostasy in a previous generation, occult practice that was never explicitly renounced. These can create standing that descends, which explains why a genuinely devout person with no obvious individual history sometimes finds themselves afflicted in ways they cannot account for. They may be carrying a legal right they did not personally create. The fourth is significant, sustained unforgiveness, not ordinary human difficulty in forgiveness. Deliberate, maintained refusal, a choice to hold the wound as a weapon, to nurse the grievance, to refuse the release. Ripperger teaches that sustained unforgiveness creates a specific crack in the interior structure through which obsession can enter. Bitterness that is chosen and maintained over years becomes a legal opening. Now, the diagnostic gap that produces the 25% is this. None of these 4 mechanisms appear in a psychiatrist's intake form. The psychiatrist asks about trauma history, family mental health history, current life stressors. All legitimate questions, all relevant to understanding the psychological picture, but none of them identify legal rights. The psychiatrist cannot see the unconfessed habitual sin. cannot see the grandfather's Freemasonry, cannot see the unforgiveness the patient is protecting like a wound they refuse to let heal. And so the treatment addresses the symptom, the intrusive thoughts, the anxiety, the interior bombardment, without touching the mechanism that is generating it. This is the diagnostic gap. This is why it does not reach the root. I want to give you the 7 specific signs that distinguish diabolical obsession from ordinary psychological anxiety. This is the list that most people come to this topic needing, and this is where the practical diagnostic lives. I want to be precise. I am not presenting this as a substitute for professional evaluation. A person experiencing severe mental health symptoms should seek qualified help. What I am presenting is the additional layer of discernment that Catholic theology has always recognized as necessary. The spiritual examination that sits alongside, not against, the psychological one. The first sign is ego-dystonic intrusion. Ego-dystonic is a psychiatric term that means the person experiencing the thought finds it alien to their own values and identity. They do not want the thought. They did not choose it. They are horrified by it. They fight it. This distinguishes obsession from temptation in the ordinary sense. Ordinary temptation arrives and finds some part of the person willing to entertain it. The imagination wanders toward it. In obsession, the thought arrives with a quality of foreignness. It has a violence and an alien character that the person immediately recognizes as not from themselves. Padre Pio describes this precisely. He was not tempted by the blasphemies. He was bombarded by them. They arrived from outside with force against his interior resistance. The second sign is resistance to prayer without resolution of legal rights. This is the marker Padre Pio identified explicitly. His prayer did not stop the thoughts. His acts of will did not stop them. His holiness, which was extraordinary, did not stop them. They continued until his spiritual director intervened through specific means of deliverance. In ordinary psychological anxiety, certain forms of prayer produce measurable relief, not because prayer is magic, but because prayer engages the rational faculty, reorients the interior toward objective truth, and naturally reduces the disproportionate activation of the fear response. In genuine diabolical obsession, prayer produces something different, not relief, but escalation. The assault frequently intensifies precisely at the moment of prayer. This is documented across the exorcism literature and in Padre Pio's own letters. The attack reaches its greatest intensity when the affected person attempts to pray their way out, because the legal right is still in place, and the enemy who holds that right is not obligated to withdraw simply because the person is praying. The legal claim has to be addressed before the prayer reaches the root. The third sign is a pattern of blasphemous thoughts, specifically during Mass and prayer. Not generic anxiety, not wandering thoughts. Violent, specific blasphemy. Against Christ, against the Eucharist, against Our Lady, against the person's own most sacred beliefs, arriving precisely when the person is most trying to be present to God. Padre Pio describes this with anguish in his letters. He writes that when he approaches the altar, the assault reaches its most violent. When he tries to pray, the darkness deepens. The tactical targeting is significant. Ordinary psychological intrusive thoughts are not strategically aimed. They follow the person's anxiety patterns. They tend to cluster around the person's specific fears and moral sensitivities. Diabolical obsession attacks specifically at the point of the person's relationship with God, because that relationship is what the enemy wants to destroy. The targeting is not random, it is aimed. The fourth sign is the imagery of despair about salvation, not fear of death, not general existential anxiety, specific repeated assault by the thought that the person's soul is damned, that their confession was invalid, that God has abandoned them specifically, that they are beyond the reach of mercy. Padre Pio writes about this in multiple letters. It was, he said, one of the most persistent and violent forms of the assault, not physical at that point, but interior, the sense that all was already lost, that his suffering was not purification, but punishment, that God was not present. He recognized it eventually for what it was, not a truth about his soul's condition, a lie with the violence of an assault, projected into his interior from outside. The distinction matters enormously. If the despair comes from genuine recognition of sin, it produces repentance. It moves toward the confessional. It reaches toward mercy. If the despair comes from obsession, it paralyzes. It tells the person there is no point in going to confession. It specifically discourages exactly the sacrament that would begin to break the legal right. The enemy targets the sacraments, always. The fifth sign is intrusive imagery of violence, especially around sacred things and sacred persons. Thoughts of harming family members, violent images during Mass, impulses the person would never act on and would be horrified to speak aloud. The person experiencing this frequently concludes they are evil, that the thoughts are evidence of who they truly are. They are not. Genuine evil does not experience these thoughts as horrifying. The person who is genuinely moving toward evil does not fight the thoughts. They entertain them. They cultivate them. The ego-syntonic quality, the sense that the thought fits with who you are, is the mark of a person whose will is being engaged. In obsession, the thoughts are violently alien. The person experiencing violent imagery against sacred things is usually the person whose soul is most oriented toward those things. The enemy attacks what he most wants to destroy. The sixth sign is sudden, crushing despair and darkness specifically at the beginning or end of sacred times, before confession, after receiving communion, at the start of a Lenten or Advent resolution, at the moment of making a consecration or a commitment. The timing is tactical. It is not coincidence that people who are about to make significant spiritual decisions experience sudden darkness. Overwhelming inadequacy, the sense that the commitment is pointless. The enemy moves at the thresholds. He understands the spiritual economy well enough to know when an act of grace is about to enter a soul, and he concentrates his assault at exactly that doorway. The seventh sign is the inability to be reached by the sacraments over an extended period, despite regular reception. Not a single difficult season, not a period of spiritual dryness that is a normal part of the interior life. An extended, consistent pattern in which the person receives the sacraments regularly and faithfully. Mass, confession, sometimes the rosary daily, and still finds no interior change. The pressure does not lift. The thoughts do not quiet. The darkness does not thin. For years. This is not normal spiritual dryness. Normal dryness is the absence of consolation, the sense of God's felt absence, the difficulty of prayer. Obsession is different. It is not emptiness. It is active assault. It is noise, not silence. It is bombardment, not withdrawal. And the reason sacramental reception does not resolve it is the same reason prayer alone does not resolve it. The legal right is still in place. Until the legal right is addressed, the sacraments address the soul without touching the mechanism of the assault. Not because the sacraments lack power, because the standing the enemy holds is still active. And active standing requires specific revocation, not just sacramental grace in general, specific deliverance. Now, here is where I want to bring in Teresa. Teresa came to see me 12 years after she graduated from my religion class at the high school in Covington. She was in her early 30s. She had been going to therapy for 4 years. She had seen 3 different psychiatrists. She had tried multiple medications. The clinical diagnosis was treatment-resistant OCD, specifically the intrusive thought variant. The thoughts were worse during Mass, blasphemies, violent images, despair so crushing she had stopped receiving communion because she was afraid the state she was in made her unworthy. She was still going to Mass, still trying to pray, still fighting with everything she had. I sat with her for 2 hours. I asked her a question none of her psychiatrists had asked. I asked about her history with the occult, not major involvement, anything. She was quiet for a long time. In college, she said. A Ouija board twice at a party. She had laughed it off, thought it was silly, felt vaguely guilty about it afterward, but had not brought it to confession because she did not think it was serious enough to matter. I asked about unforgiveness. There was her father. 12 years of a wound she had decided, at some level, was the one she would not release. Not dramatic bitterness. The quiet, maintained kind. the wound kept at a careful distance from the mercy she offered everything else. I gave her two things: the name of a theologically solid confessor, a priest I trusted who was familiar with spiritual warfare and would know how to handle what she brought him, and a copy of Father Ripperger's deliverance prayers for use by the laity. I told her what I am telling you tonight. Go to confession. Name the Ouija board specifically. Name the unforgiveness. Ask the confessor to pray the prayer of absolution with the specific intention of revoking any legal right that contact had established. Then pray the prayer of command. She did. Within 3 months, Teresa was free. Not managed. Free. The intrusive thoughts stopped. The blasphemies during Mass stopped. She received communion again. Nothing in her medication changed during those 3 months. Her therapist noted the change, but could not explain it by any clinical variable. One thing had changed. The legal rights were revoked. I have thought about Teresa often since then. I taught her religion for a year. I gave her the correct sacramental theology. I prepared her well, I believed, for adult Catholic life. I never taught her about legal rights. I never taught her that a Ouija board in college was not a trivial thing to carry without confession. I never taught her the difference between psychological obsession and diabolical obsession. I should have. 35 years in a classroom and I never taught that. Let me give you what I should have taught. Step 1 is what I'm calling the obsession audit. It takes about 15 minutes. You need a pen and paper. You write down, honestly, the answers to 4 questions. Is there a habitual sin in my life that I have confessed in form, but not with genuine sorrow? Something I confessed while already planning to continue? Is there any occult contact in my past, even casual, that I have never brought specifically to confession? Horoscopes read regularly. Tarot cards. A Ouija board once or twice at a party. Meditation practices based on emptying the mind. Anything. Is there anyone I have made a deliberate, maintained choice not to forgive? Not a struggle toward forgiveness, a settled decision to hold the wound. Is there any family history of serious occult practice, Freemasonry, or formal apostasy? Write down what comes. Do not minimize. The enemy depends on minimization. He depends on the assessment that what you did was not serious enough to matter, that the Ouija board was just a game, that the bitterness toward your father is justified, not a legal right. Write it down. Step 2 is confession this week, not a general confession covering everything vaguely, a specific confession that names what you found in the audit. If you have never confessed the occult contact, name it. If you have confessed the habitual sin without genuine sorrow, confess it again, this time honestly, naming the pattern. If you can find a confessor who is familiar with spiritual warfare, ask him, directly before he gives absolution, to pray with the specific intention of revoking any legal right that what you are confessing may have established. Not every priest is equipped to do this. If yours is not, the absolution still matters. The sacrament is valid. But the additional step of explicit revocation, when available, addresses the legal dimension more precisely. Step 3 is the prayer of command. This is adapted from the form Father Ripperger has articulated in deliverance prayers, for use by the laity, available as a free PDF. You say it aloud, standing, in the room where the thoughts are worst. In the name of Jesus Christ, by the power of his cross and his blood, I command every spirit of obsession, every spirit of intrusive thought, every spirit that has been given any legal standing in my interior life, through sin, through occult contact, through inherited right, through unforgiveness. I command you to leave my mind, to leave my imagination, to leave the space where I pray and think and encounter God. Every legal right you hold, I revoke now through the merits of Christ's passion, through the intercession of the Immaculate Heart of Mary, and through the absolution I have received in confession. You have no standing here. Go to the foot of the cross. In Jesus' name, amen. That prayer is a juridical act, not a sentiment, not an expression of hope. A command delivered in the name of the one before whom every knee bends, directed at a specific claim that the enemy holds. Say it when the thoughts begin. Say it standing, aloud, with the authority of your baptism. Step 4 is a blessed object at your bedside, holy water in a small container, blessed salt on the windowsill if you have it, a relic or a blessed rosary near where you sleep, not superstition. A sacramental is a physical object that the Church has consecrated to act as a conduit of grace and an instrument of spiritual protection in the physical environment. The enemy operates in the physical world. He is not purely abstract. The physical environment matters to him. A room that contains sacramentals is a room with a different spiritual character than a room without them. Step 5 is invoking Padre Pio specifically, not as a general act of devotion. Because he experienced this, he endured diabolical obsession for years. He documented it with precision in his own letters. He knows what it feels like from the inside. He fought through it without surrendering his will, and he is now in a position to intercede with an understanding that no saint who never experienced it can offer. Pray this: Saint Pio of Pietrelcina, who suffered the dark bombardment of the enemy and never surrendered your will to God's enemy. You know what this feels like. You described it in letters that still exist. You wrote about the thoughts that arrived without your consent and fought them with everything you had. Pray for me. Ask God to reveal any legal right the enemy holds over my interior life. Ask Our Lady to intercede specifically for the revocation of that right. Ask for the peace that is not the absence of suffering, but the certainty that the will remains God's, even when the mind is under siege. I trust your intercession, because you earned it in exactly this battle. Amen. I want to close with the confession I promised you at the beginning. I spent 35 years teaching Catholic theology. I taught the sacraments correctly. I taught the doctrines. I prepared students for confirmation, for adult life in the Church, for the questions they would face. I never taught them that 1 in 4 adults may be experiencing diabolical obsession. I never taught them the difference between an intrusive thought that is psychological and an intrusive thought that is a demonic projection. I never taught them legal rights or what casual occult contact actually opens, or why a maintained unforgiveness is not just a spiritual problem, but a juridical one. I never taught Teresa, who sat in my class for a year, who was bright and devout and did everything I asked of her, the framework that would have saved her 4 years of wrong treatment. I do not say this to flagellate myself. I say it because I think the gap in my teaching represents the gap in most Catholic formation in the last 60 years. We taught the devotions. We taught the sacraments. We taught the morality. We did not teach spiritual warfare with the precision the tradition actually contains. And because we did not teach it, the enemy moved into the gap and called himself anxiety. He called himself OCD. He called himself treatment-resistant depression. He called himself the condition that responds to everything except what would actually work. And millions of people have spent years in that gap. You now know the framework. You know what obsession actually is and how it differs from psychological anxiety. You know the 7 signs. You know the mechanism of legal rights and how they are established. You know what Teresa found when she did the audit and went to confession. You know the prayer that works. Do the obsession audit tonight. 15 minutes. Pen and paper. Go to confession this week. Name specifically what you found. Pray the prayer of command aloud when the thoughts begin. Place a blessed object in the room where you sleep. Invoke Padre Pio, who suffered this and overcame it, who knows the interior of this battle better than any text on a page can convey. I should have taught this 30 years ago. I am teaching it now. God bless you, and stay vigilant.